December 1773, 92,000 pounds of tea were hurled into Boston Harbor, a loss of 1 million pounds today. This was not simply a rebellion over taxes. For a century, Britain's global power, and 10% of its revenue, hinged on total control over a Chinese plant, tea. Their obsession set off a chain reaction of addiction, drains of silver, corporate armies, and ultimately the unraveling of the very empire they had built. The real story of how a single plant could destroy an empire starts here. By the dawn of the 18th century, tea had transformed from an exotic luxury into a British necessity. In 1700, the East India Company imported just 20,000 pounds of tea each year, barely enough to supply the upper crust of London. But the appetite for tea spread quickly, fueled by rising wages, the ritual of afternoon tea, and a flood of advertising that made the drink a symbol of refinement and national identity. By 1766, annual imports had exploded to 6 million pounds, a 300-fold surge in less than 7 decades. Auction houses in London became the nerve center of this trade, with merchants bidding fiercely for shipments fresh off the docks. Ledgers from the company's sales reveal a relentless climb in both volume and price, as tea became woven into every level of society, from aristocrats to dock workers. The government's cut was enormous. By the 1770s, taxes and duties on tea poured into the treasury, accounting for nearly 10% of total state revenue. No other single commodity came close. This steady stream of income underwrote wars, paid down national debt, and kept the machinery of empire running. But behind the boom, a hidden cost grew ever larger. China, the sole legal source of tea, demanded payment in silver, and British merchants had little to offer in return. Each chest of tea shipped to London meant more bullion leaving British vaults and flowing east. The more tea the nation drank, the deeper the financial hole became. What began as a fashionable habit was now a fiscal addiction, and the stakes stretched far beyond the teacup. Silver shipments left London in a steady stream, vanishing into the hands of Chinese merchants who would accept nothing else for tea. By the 1760s, the British Treasury was losing an estimated 3.9 million pounds in silver every year. This outflow was so severe that it threatened the stability of the entire imperial budget. East India Company ledgers from this period show the mounting anxiety. Each new shipment of tea meant another drain on the reserves that underpinned Britain's currency and credit. The company's directors, facing a crisis with every auction, began to see their trade as a high-risk gamble rather than a guaranteed windfall. To maintain this flow of tea and the revenue it generated, the company expanded its reach far beyond commerce. By 1800, the company commanded 200,000 soldiers, twice the size of the British Army itself. These troops enforced company rule across India, collected taxes, and secured the routes that kept tea and silver moving. The company operated as a power in its own right, with its own laws, courts, and armies, answering only to its shareholders and the crown. But the arithmetic no longer favored Britain. The more tea the country drank, the more silver disappeared into the East. British policymakers scoured ledgers and trade manifests, searching for any way to stop the hemorrhage. The system that had once delivered prosperity now looked dangerously unstable, with the company's military might propping up a business model that was bleeding the empire dry. The search for a solution would soon take the empire down a darker path, one that would reshape the world's balance of power. Opium fields in Bengal became the unlikely answer to Britain's tea obsession. Starting in the 1760s, the East India Company forced Indian farmers to grow poppies, buying the sticky resin and processing it into bricks of opium. Each year, thousands of chests left Calcutta, bound for the Chinese coast. By 1838, these shipments reached 1,400 tons, enough to supply millions of addicts and to fill the company's coffers. The mechanics were ruthless. British goods flowed to India, opium sailed to China, and the silver that once paid for tea now poured out of Chinese ports instead. Ledgers in London flipped from deficit to surplus almost overnight. The human cost in China was staggering. By the mid-1830s, imperial records counted nearly 2 million opium addicts. Silver, the lifeblood of the Qing economy, drained away at a rate of 2 million pounds a year. Local officials watched as tax receipts shrank and communities unraveled. The Daoguang Emperor, desperate to halt the devastation, appointed Lin Zexu as imperial commissioner in 1838. Lin launched a sweeping crackdown, arresting dealers, destroying pipes, and demanding foreign merchants surrender their opium stocks. His memorials to the throne thundered with outrage. To purchase your opium, we must expend an unlimited amount of silver. When Lin seized and destroyed 20,000 chests of foreign opium in 1839, British merchants demanded restitution. The company's profits and Britain's tea supply hung in the balance. The response came not in negotiation, but in warships. The First Opium War erupted that year, a conflict sparked by a drug trade designed to keep British teapots full. The plant that once drained British silver now fueled a global confrontation. In 1848, a Scottish botanist named Robert Fortune stepped ashore in China with a mission that would change the course of empires. Hired by the East India Company for £500 a year, Fortune was no ordinary plant collector. He was a spy tasked with uncovering the secrets of Chinese tea. Disguised in the robes of a Qing official, his head shaved and a false queue trailing down his back, Fortune moved through forbidden tea-growing districts where foreigners were banned on pain of death. His journals described tense encounters at checkpoints, bribes paid to local guides, and nights spent hiding from Qing patrols in remote villages. Over 3 years, Fortune gathered not just seeds, but entire living plants. Using Wardian cases, sealed glass boxes that kept the seedlings alive on long sea journeys, he shipped more than 20,000 tea plants and seedlings out of China. He recruited a dozen skilled Chinese tea workers, persuading them with promises of wages and new lives in India. The most prized specimens came from the Wuyi Mountains, the birthplace of black tea, where Fortune risked exposure to collect cuttings and observe the closely guarded processing techniques. Every shipment that left Shanghai carried centuries of botanical knowledge, snatched from the heart of the world's most secretive industry. When Fortune's final consignment arrived in Calcutta in 1851, the monopoly that had kept China at the center of global tea vanished overnight. The East India Company now possessed both the plants and the expertise to grow tea on their own terms. The groundwork was laid for vast plantations in Assam and beyond, shifting the balance of power from Chinese hillsides to British-controlled estates in India. Assam's jungles, once untouched, became the heart of Britain's new tea empire. By 1870, Indian plantations were producing 6.7 million pounds of tea a year. 3 decades later, output soared to 175 million pounds, covering 700,000 acres, an area larger than some English counties. Behind these numbers stood an army of workers, most recruited from distant villages with promises that rarely matched reality. Days on the estate stretched 12 to 14 hours, from sunrise to sunset, in heat and monsoon rains. Wages barely covered rice, and crowded barracks left little space for comfort or rest. Disease swept through the labor lines, malaria, cholera, and fever claiming lives at a staggering pace. Mortality rates reached as high as 20% in some years, especially among new arrivals. For every chest of tea shipped to London, the true cost was measured in human suffering, written into the ledgers of planters and the memories of those who survived. Tea workers in Assam and Bengal did not remain silent. In 1921, the Assam Cha Mazdoor Sangha organized mass strikes that brought dozens of plantations to a standstill, slashing export revenues, and forcing colonial officials to negotiate. By 1946, walkouts swept across the industry, halving tea exports in some months and sending panic through British boardrooms. During both World Wars, the British government treated tea as a strategic resource, rationing supplies and diverting precious shipping space to keep morale high at home and on the front. But when independence arrived in 1947, Britain lost control of nearly all its tea-growing estates overnight. The annual revenue loss was £100 million, about 2% of GDP, a fiscal shock from which the empire would never recover. The global tea trade once dictated the fate of empires. Today, a handful of crops, including coffee, cocoa, and palm oil, still shape billions of lives through extraction and inequality. The lesson endures. Any system built on exploitation eventually meets resistance. The real cost of a commodity never stays buried for long.